Well, how about we get to this? I'm going to skip around a little bit because I don't want to subject y'all to 5 minutes of libertarian stuff. But I saw this video the other day. It really cracked me up because you're going to be amazed as to where it ends. And I think is a pretty good example, of how libertarians seem to struggle a lot with history. But let's just play a little bit of this political theory video, and I'm not going to tell you who it's by. You'll hear towards the end, which will be a little added treat for all of you.
Why do governments get better at all? In the Middle Ages, the feudal system dominated Europe. Kings, lords, and armed mercenaries plundered peasants, who often starved. Few imagined that better government was possible. But how did it get better? A small group of persecuted refugees fled to a marsh and founded a society on shaky ground. This startup city was based not on kings and killing, but merchants.
Wait, I'm going to stop it right there because this is going to be a theme about startup cities, which is a pretty incredible way to talk about the kind of natural progression of Venice. Now, I'll let them give them their version of Venice before I tell you what I think about it. But I did just want to remind y'all, keep your ear out for this startup language that they keep on peppering in their history lesson.
The serene Republic of Venice, as it was then called, came to dominate the Mediterranean for 1,000 years, setting a model that changed the world forever. Venetian entrepreneurs adopted the best practices of Western Europe, the Byzantine Empire, and the Islamic world, and advanced many of the foundational institutions of modern free enterprise. International banking, insurance, joint stock companies, even double-entry bookkeeping. Venice produced so much wealth. Some of the most creative people in the world moved there and initiated what became known as the Italian Renaissance.
I'm not Venetian, but I would probably be a little bit upset if my culture is being represented by a plastic mask you can get tourist style. But
Renaissance. The people of the marsh got a rare opportunity to start over with a blank slate. In spite of all their moral failings, torture, assassination, astounding greed, mankind began to emerge from barbarism and develop the principles of civil society. Blank slates are hard to come by.
Okay, let's just take a moment here, and I might have to start skipping around pretty soon, just because it is a little bit of a longer video. I don't want to subject y'all to too much, but again, it's absolutely wild presentation of Venice. No doubt, people moved into that region, and it is fairly true that the understanding is that it were people who were sort of exiled from other communities. But that's actually not too unique in European or even global history. I mean, plenty of cities are founded and communities are people who move into an area, leaving another one. So it's wild because they're trying to make a very clear, like a one-to-one, and I don't want to spoil the end by telling you all about what kind of argument they're making. But it's a very strange version of history, and it shows again how libertarians, again, despite making their argument, being like the people who like understand business and finance and capitalism and commerce, they are material politics is extremely absent, is notably absent for most of their understanding of history. So Venice is a city that had immense amounts of wealth, and in fact, with that came a bit more liberalization than you saw in some other places. But you know what? That's actually not unique compared to most other places that had economies similar to Venice. And why is that? Venice is a city, unique, beautiful. I'm not against Venice. But why is Venice able to amass such incredible amounts of wealth? Because it was situated in an incredibly important place for trade. It was at the edge of, it's between two empires. It's a great way to get goods up through the Mediterranean, up into the rest of Europe. And it profited immensely from being the in-between, just like many other places across the globe who found themselves inside of a trade route, were able to pull incredible amounts of wealth. And you know it's I want to talk about feudalism in a second, but it's a very notable thing. I mean, it's one of those things that you learn when you study history, is that, yeah, being on the chain of global trade is incredibly beneficial for your society. Like, no one's arguing against that, but recognizing where that comes from, I think is really damn important, because again, they're not framing this as, Venice was a place that was situated on important trade routes, that was able to take that wealth and build an interesting society, right? That's a pro-capitalist argument, even, that I would generally accept, right? Um, but that's not what they're arguing here. They're arguing that smart people who had crazy ideas got together on this marshland that everyone thought was worthless and useless, and they created the greatest city in Europe, right? I mean, that's effectively the argument. Again, not about its relationship to global regional trade, but rather a bunch of people with some good ideas got together, and those ideas went out and beat out the other ones. But let's keep on going with this history, because remember, this is political theory from them. What makes governments better?
For new frontiers never stopped. A few centuries later, 17th century Europe became an oppressive place for all sorts of misfit people. Many of these oddballs fled to the New World, bringing with them their zany ideas.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot to note. Spoiler: they're not going to talk about the British Empire here. Which, again, if you want to talk about a society that had immense amounts of wealth, I mean, this is a society. The sun never sets on the British Empire. That, again, you can make an argument here about how maritime, commerce was extremely beneficial for British society, while obviously being absolutely decimating for people across the globe. I want to go back to one of the things that they skip. They make a comparison between feudal Europe and pro-commerce Venice. And I think this is one of those things where it's again, as a political philosophy, libertarianism is extremely shallow, because why was a city like Venice able to develop better culturally? Why was it able to provide a bit higher standard of living for folks than the feudal system? I'll tell you why, and it's also one of the reasons that Marxists recognize that capitalism was an incredibly powerful and progressive force in society, because by taking the power away from feudal lords into the hands of a kind of merchant class, a capitalist class, you then start to see much more investment in society. Why is that? Because there's a difference between early capitalists and feudal lords, and the main difference is feudal lords consume their wealth. I'll say that again. Feudal lords consume their wealth. You get, by virtue of your blood, the right to have peasants come work on your land, the right to get a percentage of yields from serfs who live on your land, and you're also entitled to their labor a certain percentage of the year. But that was not utilized to then invest in, I don't know, windmills in farming communities, or in better production systems. It was used to be consumed by the lord and their family, and maybe to fund some adventures when you want to go and get a little excited and fight some fight some other lords that you're pissed about. Right? Feudalism was a very, very wasteful system when it came to reinvesting, reutilizing the wealth that was created by the labor of the many. Right? Absolutely disastrous. And in fact, that's why you see such stagnation for a long period of time, is because you're basically creating wealth in society, and instead of it being utilized in any kind of productive form, it's just utilized to create more and more lavish lifestyles for a few folks. There's no interest really in expanding your wealth by reinvesting in production. Maybe by trying to get someone else's title so you can get a little bit more shit. But it was an extremely wasteful way to organize society, which is why when early forms of capitalism started to become in competition with the feudal system, you started to see a lot of these European societies go through massive shifts. Because if you have a part of society that is actually utilizing social wealth, and obviously it's still exploitation. It's still being pulled into the hands of very few, but because of their position, because of the way that they need to see their profits increase, they're much more willing to invest in production, which creates more and more stuff, which generally creates more wealth in a society. Eventually, there becomes a crisis where the capitalist class, the merchant class that used to be, sort of looked down upon, was an increasingly important part of the national economy, and also of the national political economy. So much so that all these people who had their rights and titles were reliant on a merchant capitalist class to engage in very basic functions of the state. Then what happens? Well, that capitalist class says, well, these rights of blood and privilege, they don't work for us. We're creating a lot of the wealth. We need to start to see society into liberal. I'm fast forwarding very quickly, but just saying to bring this up, like that is the Marxist account of the transition of feudalism into capitalism in Europe. And it's a libertarian could latch on to that if they wanted to, right? So look how great commerce is. Look how great capitalism is. But instead of doing that, they do this very bizarre fucking move where they make it into like these misfits and strange upstarts create startup cities that win out in the end, instead of actually looking at the actual history of the globe. Let's go to America, where we're about to hear another pretty wild mythology.
Among them that people should govern themselves by vote. The misfits demonstrated that the naive utopian ideals of democracy and constitutional republics could work better than the kingdoms that prevailed in Europe. There were true faults: genocide, slavery, child abuse. But the startup societies in North America created innovations that utterly changed the rest of the world. Centuries later, authoritarian...
All right, Charleston, South Carolina, startup city of the year. So, like, I mean, what happens in America? Again, it's just a wild thing. People were fleeing the European kings. No, these were chartered by the governments of European societies that had incorporated mercantilism like into their the fabric of their state being. For the British Empire to succeed, it needed to continue to expand and create more colonies so that it was able to extract natural resources from North America, to be able to extract resources and value created by slave labor in North America, to then be traded where? In the United Kingdom. Right. So it wasn't startup societies. It was the expansion of state-run mercantilist systems. Here's an example to help people understand this. We got 13 colonies, right, in the United States. If you look at American history, you look at the history of the big cities. There's a city that was extremely dominant throughout most of early American history, right, under the British, that became a much smaller city, very pretty place. I'm talking about Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston, South Carolina was a very important port for the British because it was situated in a place that was very close to the other colonial possessions in the Caribbean. It was a conscious project of the British state to invest in Charleston, South Carolina, to basically make that city function as a global regional port, even if it might not make as much sense. I don't know if these things were just to sort of come up naturally. And it's why you see Charleston fade very, very precipitously as like a major American port after independence, because the American government wasn't willing to make those same kind of investments in Charleston, and the ruling class in the South wasn't particularly interested in being a mercantile civilization. They had the slaveocracy, which worked pretty well for those at the top there. I just bring this up to say that like this kind of wild notion of American history as being like startup cities of people inspired by good ideas instead of things that were deliberately planned to say we want we want to invest in certain cities so that we can profit in the United Kingdom, is again completely ahistorical. And you can make the argument, this is government being bad. Charleston wasn't a great port compared to a place like New York or Philadelphia. But they don't. They make this kind of wild ass story about nice, interesting folks, the weirdos coming together. And, for libertarians, they do have to highlight the weirdo aspect a lot.
Came to dominate a third of the...
I'm going to skip the communism thing. I know libertarians will whine. I will tell you their argument exactly, because it is a pretty basic one. It's, again, not even a good argument from their perspective. It's the argument that the Soviet Union collapses because of the Beatles and blue jeans, right? People wanted American culture, so they revolted, which, again, is a very simplistic notion and denies people like the actual agency against a lot of the things in the Soviet system that people were rebelling against. The end of the Soviet system came after years and years and years of collapse within the Soviet economy, precisely because, as you started to see the rates of profit that you could get from production decline, what did we do in the West? In the West, we didn't, despite all this talk of popular culture and better lives, what's happening in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s? What are those years? Years of massive austerity, cutting of social services, depressing wages, outsourcing industry into other low-wage countries, and decimating the working class in the West. The system in the United States and the United Kingdom was much more willing to do austerity than the Soviet system. And on that level, the Soviet economy just could not compete with it, which created massive amounts of stagnation in the Soviet economy, which eventually left a system that had been very, very decrepit politically and socially, to not be able to withstand the shock of Gorbachev basically trying to open up society. And then we all know what happens afterwards. Life gets much, much worse in Russia. The rise of right-wing parties supported by the Americans because they didn't want socialists, democratic socialists or communists to come into power, putting their finger on the scale. They talk a lot about Russian interference in 2016. Y'all look what happened in Russia post-Soviet Union. Again, though, immaterial history. So it's not about the economic system or the willingness of American capitalism to impose punishment on the American working class. It's blue jeans and Beatles, right? It's the kind of shit that sells books at the airport. So we get the argument from them, though. The argument is smart, interesting people sometimes go off and do their own thing, and then it works out better, and then things change somehow. And it doesn't really make it clear how they changed in other places. But it seems like they might have an idea for something we should be doing next. And I think this will make y'all happy when you hear what the solution is.
Something new and see if you can attract people to move there. The more experiments, the more surprising solutions and shocking failures we discover. As long as people have the freedom to leave experiments they don't like and choose the ones they do, the bad ideas go bankrupt and the good ideas change the world. What if I told you there's a technology for that? Nearly half the world's surface is unclaimed by any
It's the
country.
ocean, y'all.
Bob Ballard, the famous ocean explorer who discovered the sunken Titanic, says the technology for floating societies is at hand. Seasteading seeks to radically accelerate the means by which people experiment with new societies. As long as people can create seasteads voluntarily,
Oh my God.
join them voluntarily, and, most crucially,
The most
quit
fucked up
them
thing I've ever
voluntarily.
seen in my life.
A diverse market
We're
of
leaving-
governance providers will emerge.
Society can't
Floating
handle us
neighborhoods
anymore,
can
so they're making us go out
disassemble
into the
and move
fucking
about
sea.
like a jigsaw puzzle.
I support
Increasing
this.
the power of
I think all
governance
libertarians should
consumers
have to
choose
go
new
out and live in the
societies,
ocean. I think
and
it's
creating
wonderful.
the incentives for governance providers to innovate to please residents. This will rapidly increase the rate of peaceful innovation
Oh
in
my
governance.
God. Could you
We
imagine?
land
I mean,
folk are stuck
this ain't
in
gonna
a dark
happen. They've been
ages
trying to
of
make it
government.
happen.
We need our
I
Venice.
actually haven't seen this far.
We need 1,000 Venices. Half the earth waits for us to demonstrate better societies can work. Long before we go to Mars, we're going to populate the ocean with sustainable startup societies. As the Renaissance artist Michelangelo said, criticize by creating. To learn more about this bright future,
Well, who are the Beatles? What are the Beatles and Blue Jeans going to be for the unfortunate souls who get stuck out on the sea with the most annoying pedophile you've ever met in your life? Queen Cardi B, please help to save these souls and bring them back to America. I don't know, like it's awesome. They've been doing this for a while. I'm sure some people have heard about these seasteading things. It's not taken off. Peter Thiel invested in it, but he just sort of takes a try anything approach to these things. Because like if you're rich, you want to be able to spend your money on some shit. And there's only so much wine you can import onto your fucking barge in the middle of the Pacific. Not a life that I don't know. Not a life that seems very enticing to me. So yeah, that's libertarian history and political philosophy. I hope this hope that was interesting to y'all. Honestly, I would love to stay and chat a little bit more on this, but I have to go meet our good friend Gene Bajelon to record this weekend's bonus episode on how everything is not a fucking color revolution. We'll be back next Tuesday with a really exciting interview on Utah in our state series project. Next couple of weeks, we have some awesome guests lined up. We got Brett coming on from Rev Left Radio. We're going to be talking about building left-wing movements in quote-unquote red states. I might see if I can get him to talk a little bit about this MAGA communism thing and LaRouche, because he's done a couple episodes on it. And then we're also going to be joined by our good friend and teacher, Harvey K., who has a new book that's out now, The British Marxist Historians, with a new introduction and preface. So we'll be getting him on to talk about that work. I always love having Harvey back on the show, and I'm excited to have Brett. We've been meaning to get Brett on for a long ass time, so I'm excited. Excited to be doing that. And yeah, appreciate everyone so much. Hope that was a good reminder to whatever you do, don't become a fucking libertarian. And we'll see you all this Sunday with Gene Bajelon for patrons and the rest of y'all on Tuesday. Take care.